All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm Larry Williams, the director of CARMA, the Consortium for the Advancement of Research Methods and Analysis. It is August 28th, and I'm coming to you from my office in Lincoln, Nebraska, at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, the home of CARMA. So we're very excited to be kicking off our 2018-29 CARMA programs. And one of our first events will be exactly 1 month from today, our first CARMA webcast lecture by Jose Cortina, now from Virginia Commonwealth University. And so we're going to take this opportunity to chat with Jose in our first version this year of our Meet the Methodologist interview. It's a real treat to be chatting with Jose this morning, as well as looking forward to his visit to Lincoln a month from now. I've known Jose since he was a graduate student and enjoyed watching his success as he moved through the earlier stages of his career, receiving early career awards, his editorship at Organizational Research Methods, his presidency at SIOP. And of course, I'm a fan of his various scholarly activities in different areas of research methods. Jose has contributed in many different ways throughout the years to CARMA, back through our mini conferences, webcasts, short course instructors, and many happy hours. So good morning to you, Jose. We're really grateful that you can take the time from your busy schedule to chat this morning, and are very much looking forward to you being here in this very spot 1 month from today. So
am I.
Happy Tuesday to you, dude.
So
you've undergone some changes of late, as you made the move after many years at George Mason up in Nova, which is the abbreviation for Nova, Northern Virginia, now down to my old university, the Virginia Commonwealth University School of Business in Richmond. What's up with that? How's it gone?
It's gone very well. It was I was in Mason for 21 years, and it was a difficult decision to not just leave Mason, but move from a psych department to a business school. And it's gone as well as I could possibly have hoped. As you know, Larry, we still have the house in Northern Virginia, so I spend the week in Richmond and most weekends with Kim back in Northern Virginia. But that has worked out well. I've got an apartment that's a 10-minute walk from my office. I've wanted a walkable commute since I had it my first year at Tulane as a faculty member, and I finally got that again. I have great colleagues here at VCU, and also several of them do some research methods stuff, but I've already got collaborations going with most of them on a variety of topics. And I don't know, it's also a lot of little things. I can go down the hall and get coffee and not pay for it. That's pretty cool. That's not something that happens in psychology. Yeah. I've got a window. Window's nice.
Yeah.
And other little things like that. But it's gone very well. It was probably the most productive year of my career. And part of that was due to the fact that two of my students, Kate Keeler and Zitong Sheng, came with me. So there was some continuity there that people don't always get when they move.
Yeah.
But all in all, it feels like it was a really good choice.
Yeah. Yeah, I can remember making the reverse transition from Richmond up to Detroit and living the walking life, and it is very different. So, and being residentially in the downtown area is very cool. So, on a personal note, I've told you this before, but let me just say again how happy I am for you that transition has worked so well. So you mentioned the work you've got going on with your doctoral students. You may have other projects as well. Can you give us sort of an overview of the different things you're working on now?
Yeah. There are, as always, lots of research methods related things. One of the projects that I started right when I got here with all of the graduate students was I wanted to do a sort of 25-year follow-up to a paper that I had published on coefficient alpha when I was in graduate school. By far my most cited paper. And as it happens, my advisor, Neil Schmidt, had published his most cited paper on the same topic a couple of years later. And I wanted an excuse to work with Neil again. So Neil and I collaborated with the 4 VCU doctoral students to do this sort of review. Let's look at the way that reliability is specifically, but sort of scale evaluation more generally, is handled in Journal of Applied, where I had published my paper. And let's, compare that to what are known to be recommended practices, but also compare it to JAP from 25, 30 years ago. And let's compare it to Journal of EdPsych, which is the domain from which Lee Cronbach and other people who were instrumental in the development of what we know about reliability came from. And it's lots of interesting stuff, but basically what we recommend is that for a variety of reasons, we stop bothering with coefficient alpha and move on to more sophisticated indices and practices that do a better job of showing us how good our measures are. I've got a different paper that I've been collaborating with my most frequent collaborator, Tina Kuller. I'd mentioned this one in Adelaide, Larry. We're looking at replications in our field and trying to figure out why it is that so many people don't see any sort of replication crisis. So we basically reviewed every paper from the last several years that uses some version of the word replicate and coded those papers for what they actually did to try and figure out what is and isn't out there with regard to replication. And what we find is that although there is very little constructive replication, and that's what those of us who are calling for more replication are actually calling for, there are lots of other kinds of replications. They just don't accomplish the things that constructive replication accomplishes. Anyway, those two papers are under review and we'll see what happens. There are various other methods related things. The one sort of stream of research that I've had for the last few years is about what I'm going to talk about in September, and that is the notion of restricted variance interactions. This is an idea that's been around for half a century, since Walter Mischel developed it to try and explain why it is that measures of personality don't predict the things that personality really ought to predict. And his hypothesis was that in strong situations, in situations that impose definite and known norms for behavior, everybody behaves in the same way. It doesn't make any difference whether they're introverted or extroverted or whatever. You're at a funeral listening to a eulogy, nobody talks. It doesn't matter how talkative they might be. It doesn't matter how extroverted they might be. It's a strong situation, so it compresses variance on the behavior variable. And that reduces the relationship between that behavior and things like personality. So the more I started to think about this, the more I realized that there was a lot more to it than that this notion went way beyond personality by situation interactions. And the more we looked around, I'm collaborating with lots of people on several different projects along these lines. One was published in Journal of International Business Studies. One is in Press at Journal of Management. One is being revised for JAP. We're going to send something to SNJ about entrepreneurship, to JOB about workplace mistreatment. But the basic idea is there are usually higher level of analysis variables that compress variance on one or the other lower level variable, affecting its relationship with other variables. Mm-hmm. And what's useful about this is it's a relatively simple way to justify an interaction effect. There's lots of stuff has been written about the difficulty that people seem to have in offering adequate justifications for interaction effects. If it's a restricted variance interaction, then it's really pretty simple. You have to explain why it is that at certain levels of the moderator, there's compression. You have to explain why it is that in a funeral, there are certain norms that compress talkativeness downwards, and that influences the relationship between talkativeness and other things. And the only other thing you have to explain is when those strong norms aren't there, or when the moderator is at some other level, that compression doesn't happen, and then that variable is free to do what it would normally do. And you don't have to get tied up in all of this is why for a single point increase in the moderator variable, the XY slope increases by 0.6. That's a difficult thing to pull off. I think the restricted variance interaction is an easier thing to justify. Mm-hmm. So in these various papers, we have lots of different examples. In JIBS, it's IB examples. In Journal of Management, it's everything from between person variables moderating within person relationships to country level variables moderating firm level relationships. These things exist not only at the levels that Walter Mischel had been talking about, but at every level of analysis that our field considers. So in Lincoln next month, I'm going to go through lots of examples to sort of demonstrate how it is that these things work. And my students and I have also worked out the different ways that these things can be tested, so that you test for an interaction effect, but then you actually do some follow-up tests to find out if the interaction was in fact due to this variance compression that you had thought it was due to. That's a few of the things, Larry.
Yeah. Oh, that all sounds very interesting. I'll look forward to seeing those papers in press, and particularly we'll look forward to hearing more about restricted variance interactions 1 month from the day. So when I was introducing you, I mentioned your presidency at SIOP, and of course coming out of Michigan State, where there was a heavy influence of SIOP, you probably by knowing Neil and Dan and others, knew a fair amount about professional associations as you got involved with them. And then, of course, you learned a lot more in your various roles, including your presidency. But for a lot of younger faculty and doctoral students, they don't have kind of that insider's view. And so I just was wondering, if you had any sense, given your experience, of some misunderstandings that junior faculty and students have about professional associations, things that they don't know that they might be benefited from by understanding that.
Well, the first thing that I would say is I don't know that I've met anybody who got involved in their professional association and regretted it. Everybody finds it very rewarding. You get to meet a lot of people that, whose names you might have heard, but you didn't get a chance to spend a lot of time with before that. And I have a lot of really good friends that I met through my association with SIOP or with the Research Methods Division of Academy of Management. What you find is that you're around a lot of, altruistic, volunteeristic sorts of people who are willing to give of their time in return for no compensation, other than the feeling like you are helping to advance the people, the field and the people in it. And the sorts of people who aren't all that interested in doing that sort of thing don't do it. So you're sort of left with the ones who really do want to make a positive contribution. And what you find when you sign up for whatever it might be, a PSYOP committee, chairing a PSYOP committee, running for some elected position in the Research Methods Division, when you get connected to these groups, what you see is that everybody is there because they want to help the field. That really is it. In particular, they want to help the members of PSYOP to accomplish their goals. They want to figure out how to get more people involved in the Research Methods Division so that the division can grow. The Research Methods Division is interesting in that it's primarily a service division. So, we spend our executive committee meetings trying to figure out how to do more things for the academy as a whole, with respect to things like research methods training, workshops, anything we can really think of that will meet needs of academy members more generally. So, I would say that it's a really good choice from a professional standpoint, because it gives you lots of connections. It creates an opportunity to form friendships that you might not have otherwise. But it's also just very rewarding, because at the end of it all, even though it's a lot of work, you feel like it was work that was worthwhile.
Yeah. Oh, those are great points. I kind of would add to that. I think it's kind of reflected in your comments that kind of basically you can get out of it what you put into it. And the more that you put into your work with those types of activities, the more you get out of it. I want to switch to talking about your editorship, right? So you went through a stint as an associate editor of Journal of Applied, and then were the editor at Organizational Research Methods. And I was just wondering if you, now that you're kind of looking at those through the rear view mirror, do you think that there's any way that those experiences have changed you as a researcher and as an author?
Oh, definitely. Everybody sort of grouses about all the reviews that they have to do. I do it too. Everybody does. But the reality is that the more of that stuff you do, the more editorial letters you see, the more reviews from other reviewers you see, the more you learn about what does and doesn't survive the review process. And for good or ill, there are loads of unwritten rules out there about what does and doesn't survive. What are the things that reviewers actually look for? Sometimes they aren't necessarily the things that are scientifically defensible, but if you want to survive the process, you sort of have to know what those things are. And as far as I know, the only way to do that is to see lots and lots and lots of different reviews. I've reviewed, I have no idea how many papers over the years, so I've seen lots of letters, but then with JAP, I got to write lots of letters, editorial letters for empirical papers, and then for ORM, I got to write them for research methods papers. And there's just so much to learn from being on the reviewer side of the process, and then even more to learn from being on the editor side of the process. And it is cool when you see a paper in print that you were a reviewer on, and you can read that paper and see you know, that analysis would not have been in there if I hadn't been a reviewer. And then when you're an editor, it's even more so because you really are in a position to shape these papers in a way that maximizes their contribution. Both of those gigs were a lot of work, but, you know, for example, I got, several years ago, I got rid of all of my paper journals, and I had because people had given me their old journal. I had JPs back from the 70s. I had like 3 or 4 bookcases of journals, and I got rid of all of them except ORM because I can't bring myself to throw away the paper copies of ORM. It's just too precious to me. And when you talk to other research methods division people, they say the same thing. It's like, yeah, there are journals, and then there's ORM. And ORM is personal to them for lots of reasons. One is because Larry Williams is personal to them, but it also feels like it's ours in a way that isn't true for other journals, even journals that we publish in a lot. So I'm glad I'm done with the editor thing, but I'm really, really glad that I did it, because it is very rewarding, and you learn things from being involved in that process that you can't possibly learn otherwise.
Yeah. I look over at my bookcase, and ORM is the only hard journals that I have. So, you know, you mentioned earlier people like Neil, and you know, I've always been very aware of the fact and appreciative of the fact that our field kind of is built on the foundation of people that were of that particular generation, that were doing work in research methods topics related to organizational studies before the methods division was formed, before ORM was established. And they kind of, you know, we stand on their shoulders. They help provide this vision of this area of study and this community that my generation could try to build from their work, and subsequent generations followed up on that. And so certainly one of the key figures in that group was our dear friend Larry James, who passed a few years back. And I didn't mention this at the beginning, but we did start a tradition so that the first lecture each year is the first CARMA webcast lecture. And of course, we honor it through a CARMA webcast lecture, because as I was starting both ORM and CARMA, you know, Larry was just a leading champion, with just a lot of emotional and practical support. So your lecture will be the Larry James Memorial Lecture. It's kind of fitting that it has to do with interactions, right? Given his historical work on moderation amongst the various topics. So I know that you overlapped in many ways your life and your work career with Larry. So as we close, I just wondered if you had some thoughts that you'd like to share about Larry, or favorite stories or ways that he impacted your career. Talk about Larry, if you would.
Absolutely. If you ask other people, Larry Williams, Bob Vandenberg, Jeff Edwards, Herman Guinness, this sort of question, we all have the same answer. Larry James was always there and anxious to be developmental for anybody that seemed to have some promise. The first time I met him, I was putting together a method symposium for SIOP 1996, and I needed a discussant. And I don't know why I thought that I could just call Larry James and he would say yes, but I did, and he did. That was the first time that I had actually presented in a symposium, and I was just terrified. I had seen Larry in these very contentious debate formats with Jack Hunter and Frank Schmidt, so I was sort of scared of him. And I thought, well, he will be a great discussant from a knowledge standpoint. I'm just afraid he's going to, rip me a new one. And he then, as always, was entirely developmental and very positive about everybody's papers. The whole thing couldn't have gone better from my standpoint. And in fact, he served in that role for, I put together the same sort of symposium every year, and he was a discussant for many, many years. But he was like that with everybody. And usually, at least in my experience, people who have as much impact on a field as Larry did aren't necessarily, there for the newcomers. And he always was. After he passed away, I wrote a sort of eulogy for him, which forced me to sort of think about the impact that he's had on the field. And, how many people can you name that have completely revolutionized some substantive area in the organizational sciences? There aren't that many.
Yep.
And of those, how many did it twice? You can count them probably on one hand, missing a few fingers. And of those people, how many also revolutionized some area of research methods? And of those people, how many did that again? Just to think that this guy revolutionized several different areas, substantive and methodological, is astonishing. And as far as I know, totally unprecedented. There are icons in the organizational sciences who are usually known for one particular area, lots and lots of influential things within that area. But who completely overhauls several different areas of inquiry? Other than Larry James, I can't really think of anything.
Yeah.
And to have somebody like that also be there for the people who are new to the field, it's very special. And like I said, you can find dozens of people that would tell you exactly the same thing. So this is about as big an honor as there is in the field to be able to participate in anything that has Larry James's name on it.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel hosting a lecture. But you mentioned calling Larry. One of my first experiences with him directly was when I had a reviewer at JAP that I swore was misquoting James, Mulike, and Brett. And so I decided to call Larry. And man, my fingers, I could barely dial it. I was so nervous. And he gets on the phone and I explain my situation. And he says, "Oh, hold on a second." And he comes back like 30 seconds later and he says, "Oh no, that's me. I'm the reviewer." So that was kind of a beginning of sort of that type of developmental experience. And so,
did you set him straight about James, Mulike, and Brett? Oh, you did.
Yeah. So it eventually got published, and yeah, I would say that in terms of knowing that you were here, are going to be here, and participating as you have, he would say, "You done good, kid." That was always one of his favorite expressions. So, well, we know you got a lot going on as the Labor Day weekend approaches, and I really appreciate you taking the time to hang with us virtually a bit. And we'll look forward to seeing you in a month, and real excited about your CARMA webcast lecture on September 28th. Thanks a lot, dude. Hug to you. We'll see you in a month.
Sounds good. Thanks, man. See you soon.
All right.